wallet lost on a crowded street, a homeless woman forced to choose between hunger and her conscience. But she doesn't know that this single choice will unlock the gates to a lonely billionaire's world where love, healing, and even miracles await. A story that begins with something small, but changes everything. The biting wind slipped through the thin gaps of her coat, seeping into her skin as if to remind Emily that this winter was harsher than any before. She pulled her frayed scarf tighter, trying to cling to the faint warmth left over from last night, a night when she had nothing but a crumb of bread and a scrap of paper with the address of a cafe, looking for help. It had been 3 days since she'd had a proper meal. Her stomach churned in waves, aching and empty. The worn soles of her sneakers rubbed against her sore feet after hours of aimless walking. Emily couldn't recall the last time someone had called her young lady. On the street, she was just a shadow passed by, met with pitying glances, or worse, utter indifference. Just one chance, just one small chance to start over, she whispered, a prayer carried away by the wind. But the city didn't hear the voices of people like her. No one stopped to ask why a young woman was curled up on a sidewalk corner, her head resting on an old backpack, her eyes both resolute and desperate. Passing a shop window, Emily caught her reflection. Tangled hair, sunken eyes, pale skin, she barely recognized herself. Once, she'd been a preschool education student, writing in her journal every night, with a grandmother who'd hold her hand and whisper, "You're a light, Emily. Even if they don't see it, you have to keep shining." But her grandmother was gone now. The tiny apartment they'd shared had been taken by the bank. They hadn't given her a single extra day after the final payment deadline. No one cared for explanations, just a signature. And so Emily, once a girl with dreams of opening her own kindergarten, became someone who slept on park benches, rummaging through pockets for coins to buy breakfast. Today, she was betting on a flyer taped to a lamppost. Dishwasher needed, paid daily. The paper was crooked, as if the wind might tear it away any moment, but Emily clung to that hope as if it were life itself. On her way, as she bent down to retie her torn shoelace, her eyes caught something odd by the roadside, a black leather wallet, sleek and almost new. No one was around. No sound of footsteps, no eyes watching. Emily picked it up, her hands trembling, not from the cold, but from a vague feeling something was about to change. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she stood frozen in the middle of the street. She'd never believed in fate her whole life, but at that moment, a part of her whispered, "Opportunities don't always come from open doors. Sometimes they lie quietly at people's feet, waiting for someone awake enough to bend down." Emily gripped the wallet tightly and kept walking. Inside her, a tiny spark of hope began to flicker, along with a nameless question echoing in her mind. If life is testing me, will I choose what's right or what's easy? Emily stood by the roadside, her cold, dry palms clutching the black leather wallet tightly. It felt heavy. Not just because of its premium material, but because of what it could bring, or take away, in this fleeting moment. She sat down on a step, stealing a glance around. The city continued its relentless pace, oblivious to her presence, as usual. With trembling hands, Emily opened the wallet. The first bill hit her crumbling self-respect like a slap. Then the second, the third. A stack of neatly folded bills, perfectly arranged, seemed to mock her, whispering, "Just one, and you won't have to go to bed hungry anymore." She took a deep breath, telling herself, "Don't count. If you count, there's no going back." But then her eyes slid to an ivory business card tucked among the personal documents. James Whitmore, President and CEO, Whitmore Tech Group. Emily flinched. She knew that name. Everyone did. James wasn't just a businessman. He was a legend in the tech world, a man featured in articles she'd secretly read at bookstores, a man who owned a mansion bigger than the entire neighborhood she'd once called home. She looked up at the gray sky. If this wallet had fallen into someone else's hands, it might already be gone, but it was her, Emily, the girl with nothing left to lose. "You're a light," her grandmother's voice echoed in her chest, soft as a breeze but cutting a clear line between two paths. Emily stood, shoving everything back into the wallet and snapping it shut with a decisive motion, a silent vow to herself. 3 hours later, she stood before the towering iron gates of a mansion straight out of a movie. Her hand shook as she pressed the buzzer. No answer. She knocked, rapping on the cold metal frame. Finally, a man in a security uniform emerged, frowning with irritation. "What are you doing here?" I need to see Mr. James Whitmore. I have something important." The man rolled his eyes, his lip curling in a sneer. "The boss doesn't see strangers, especially not ones dressed like that." Emily's face flushed. She knew that look. She'd seen it 100 times. The glance that dismissed her existence in a single sweep. "Please, just let him know I was here. I don't want anything. I just need to return this." She held out the wallet. The guard froze, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before his tone softened slightly. "What's your game? Steal it and then play the redemption act?" Anger flared inside her, but instead of shouting, Emily clenched her fists and kept her voice steady. "This wallet isn't mine, but if you don't let me speak to its real owner, you'll be the one answering for it." The guard blinked. There was something in her eyes, not weakness, but the resolve of someone who could lose everything and still choose right. After a few seconds of silence, he gritted his teeth. "Wait here." As the mansion gates slowly creaked open, Emily took a deep breath. She didn't know what she was stepping into, but she knew one thing for certain. Whoever was inside, she had chosen the light, and that would change everything. The iron gate creaked slowly, as if it too hesitated before the girl standing outside. Emily swallowed hard, her palms icy cold. When the man's silhouette appeared, she almost held her breath. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a confident stride despite wearing only a simple charcoal shirt. But what made Emily look up wasn't his commanding presence. It was his eyes. Melancholy eyes, deep with the weight of someone who had known loss, loneliness, and didn't want anyone to know it. James Whitmore. He stopped in front of her, his gaze flickering with suspicion but not entirely cold. "You're the one who wanted to see me?" Emily nodded, trying to stay calm despite her racing heart. She held out the wallet, lifting it gently with both hands as if it were something precious. "I found this morning, on the street. It's yours, isn't it?" James frowned, took the wallet and opened it. His hands moved swiftly, his eyes scanning each compartment. Cash still there, credit cards, business cards, even the most private note. All intact. He looked up, studying her face for the first time. No makeup, messy hair, faded clothes, but her eyes. Those were eyes you couldn't ignore, honest, unguarded, not pleading. "You didn't take anything?" he asked softly, still faintly incredulous. Emily shook her head. "It's not mine." James fell silent for a long moment. Usually he encountered two types of people, those who wanted something from him and those skilled at hiding it. But Emily, she hid nothing. No demands, no flattery, just a quiet presence that made you want to hear her say one more thing. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone softening. "Emily." "Emily Carter? And why did you come all the way here just to return a wallet?" She looked up at him, her gaze resolute but her voice soft as a breeze. "Because I wouldn't sleep easy if I kept it. I've lost almost everything. I don't want to lose the last bit of kindness I have left." James let out a faint breath, as if her words struck something deep inside him, a place he thought had frozen over long ago. He turned to the guard, his voice firm. "Open the gate. Bring her in." The man hesitated, startled, but didn't dare argue. Emily stood still, stunned. "No need," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I just wanted to return it. I don't need anything else. You did something almost no one does in this world anymore. James interrupted, his eyes gentling. "The least you deserve is a cup of tea." As she stepped across the threshold of the mansion, Emily couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. The house looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine. Polished wooden floors, a sparkling crystal chandelier, everything luxurious and cold. Not because of the temperature, but because it lacked something. A living warmth. James led her to the living room and went to make tea. While waiting, Emily sat timidly on the edge of a chair, trying not to touch anything. Then came the sound of small footsteps. Emily turned. A boy about 6 years old stood there in star-projected pajamas, clutching a toy car. He lingered in the doorway, staring at her with wide, unblinking eyes. Emily gave a gentle smile. "Hi there." The boy took a few steps closer, silent but clearly unafraid. "What's your name?" she asked. "Lucas," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Lucas, you've got a pretty cool car there," she said, leaning down slightly. Lucas edged closer, then sat on the rug beside her, holding out the car. Emily took it, and together they rolled it back and forth. No need for many words, just simple movements, but enough to create something strange. The boy smiled. A soft laugh, but real, like a crack breaking through a space that had been silent too long. James returned just in time to see it. He froze. Lucas, his son who hadn't spoken or smiled in 3 years since his mother's death, was playing with a stranger and laughing. James's gaze shifted from his son to the woman on the floor. Her gentle face, warm eyes, no effort, no forced friendliness, just a presence that felt right. For the first time in years, James wondered maybe she didn't come just to return a wallet. Lucas sat on the thick rug in the living room, his small hands pushing a toy car back and forth, leaving a faint streak on the polished wooden floor. Emily didn't say anything. She just sat beside him, close enough to feel his breathing, far enough not to intrude on the safe space Lucas had built for himself over the years. The car bumped into her foot. Emily picked it up, pretending to blow off dust. "The Warrior's hurt. We need to fix it before it races again." Lucas looked at her. He didn't speak. But he didn't pull the car back like he usually did. She placed it on a pillow, wrapping a handkerchief lightly around the front wheel. "The wheel's in pain. It needs magic." She touched the car gently, closing her eyes as if casting a spell, then opened them quickly and whispered, "Done." The car rolled forward. Lucas watched it, then let out a soft laugh. Small, fragile, but real. James, standing at the doorway, nearly dropped the teacup in his hand. After that meeting, Emily had intended to leave, but James stopped her, his voice unusually gentle. "The boy hasn't laughed like that in 3 years." Emily faltered. I didn't do anything, it was just..." "That's exactly why." He paused, then continued. "I don't know what your plans are, but if you're willing, I'd like to ask you to stay, to be Lucas's friend, the companion he needs." Emily froze. Stay? In this house? With a man like James and a wounded child like Lucas? "It's not charity," James added, as if reading her thoughts. "This is an offer from a helpless father to a woman who can do what a dozen psychologists couldn't." She looked at him, then turned to Lucas, busy stacking wooden blocks into a bridge. She nodded. On her first day living in the Whitmore mansion, Emily woke to sunlight streaming through white curtains, not to car horns, not to hunger, but to a strange sense of peace. Her room was simple, cozy. On the nightstand sat an old storybook, perhaps left there for her. On the desk, a note in the housekeeper's careful handwriting. "Lucas eats breakfast at 8. He likes toast and fresh oranges. Don't worry here, no one is left alone." Emily touched the last line. Her nose stung with sudden emotion. She found Lucas in the backyard garden, sitting under a tree, scribbling in the dirt with a small stick. Emily didn't call out to him. She sat beside him, silent for a long while. Then she took a leaf and carefully folded it into the shape of a bird. Lucas turned. "Bird?" "Yeah," she smiled. "It'll fly if you believe in it." Lucas looked at the leaf, then at her, and nodded. Wordless, but accepting. The days that followed were a string of small, miraculous moments. Emily and Lucas built a ramp with pillows, letting toy cars roll down, each run ending in a giggle. They made a tent out of blankets, calling it Space Station, a place only the two of them could enter. One time, Lucas sat drawing and handed her a picture, a house, a smiling sun, and 3 people holding hands. Emily was speechless. "Who's this?" she asked. Lucas pointed to each figure. "Me, you, Dad." James became a distant observer, but his gaze softened over time. No longer the cold man, but a father watching a miracle unfold, one that money, power, or psychologists couldn't buy. One evening, Emily tucked Lucas into bed. He grabbed her hand and whispered, "Can you tell me another story?" She sat down, opening an old storybook. She read in a gentle voice. Lucas's eyes fluttered shut midway, his breathing steady. Before she left the room, he opened his eyes and asked a question that made her heart skip. "Will you stay?" She leaned down, brushing his forehead lightly. "I'm here. Every morning, every night. Whenever you need me." Lucas smiled, then fell into a deep sleep. That night, Emily stepped onto the porch, sitting with a cup of hot tea James had brought out. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then James spoke softly. "You know, I don't think it's just Lucas who needs you." She looked at him, slightly startled. He turned to her, his eyes full of sincerity. "I do too." Emily didn't reply, but inside her something cracked open, not to break apart, but to let the light in. The box containing the dress sat on the bed like a gift from another world, a world Emily never thought she'd step into. Inside was a refined navy blue dress, its fabric soft as water, smooth as a dream. Next to it was a small note written in neat, upright handwriting. "You don't need to be perfect, just be you." Emily brushed her fingers lightly over the fabric, her hand trembling slightly. The last time she'd worn a decent dress was at her grandmother's funeral, the day everything fell apart. Now, someone wanted her to dress up again, just to stand by his side. James had invited her to the corporation's charity gala, a grand event crowded with people where every gaze would be fixed on dazzling gowns and handshakes worth millions, and he wanted her to go with him. "It's just dinner," he'd said, but his eyes told a different story. Emily stepped into the banquet hall, her hand still lightly clinging to James's elbow. The crystal chandeliers glared brightly. The hum of laughter and clinking glasses rang out, reminding her she didn't belong here. Each step in the borrowed high heels felt like an act, as if someone might notice she was a fraud and throw her out at any moment. James, on the other hand, moved with ease. He shook hands with this person, greeted that one, but his eyes always followed Emily, as if afraid she'd get lost in this sea of people. "You okay?" he asked softly, tilting his head. She nodded, but inside she was screaming. "No, I'm panicking. I'm scared." A while later, they quietly slipped away from the crowd, stepping into the garden out back, adorned with tiny lights strung up like stars. Emily kicked off her shoes, letting her bare feet sink into the soft grass. She needed something real, needed a reminder that she was still alive. James stood beside her, silent for a long while. Then he spoke. "You know, since you came into my life, I've felt myself living differently. Not just for Lucas, but for me." Emily turned to him. He was looking at her, his gaze free of pressure, just sincere. "For the first time in years, I've thought about the future, and when I picture it, I see you." Emily clenched her fists. He let out a breath. "I'm not expecting an answer, I just needed to say it." Emily lowered her head. Her heart pounded chaotically, but instead of joy, a wave of anxiety surged up like an undercurrent. Who was she to stand here in an expensive dress, next to someone like James? A girl who'd once lived on the streets, begged for food, been invisible. "James," she began, her voice shaky. You don't know me. Not really. He looked at her, not interrupting. I've lost myself before. Thought I didn't deserve love. I'm still not sure I've fully found myself again. James stepped closer but kept his distance. Then let me wait. Not to save you, but to stay if you need me. Emily fell silent. She couldn't deny her heart had softened toward him, but amid the old broken pieces of herself, she feared that even the warmest hand might accidentally hurt her again. On the drive home, the car was quiet. The city lights streaked past the window like memories rewinding. James said nothing, neither could Emily. When the car stopped, he got out first, walking around to open her door. Though his eyes weren't sad, they held a quiet waiting. "Good night," he said, light as a breeze. Emily nodded faintly, stepping past him. As their shoulders brushed, she realized, in this world, he was the first person who didn't demand anything from her except the truth. And that was what scared her most. That night she sat alone on the porch, clutching her journal. Opening the first page, she wrote, "He looks at me like I'm worthy, but how can I believe it when my whole life taught me I'm not?" She paused, gazing at the night sky. There were no stars, but a faint light glimmered silently from Lucas's bedroom window. The boy was still there, and tomorrow he'd need her again. Emily closed the journal, whispering, "Not yet time to say enough, but maybe it's time to learn to believe." That morning, no one woke Emily. No knock on the door, no sound of little feet running through the hallway as usual. Just gentle sunlight slipping through the curtains and the distant chirping of birds, as if from a separate world. She walked downstairs to the living room, a strange feeling stirring within her, like something was approaching, though it had no shape yet. On the table sat an ivory envelope, neat, elegant. On it just 2 handwritten words, "Emily." She opened it. Inside was an invitation to Ashton Academy of Educational Psychology, a full scholarship, an acceptance letter for a work-study program. At the bottom, a small note, "If you want a future, don't wait for it to come, step toward it. J." Emily sat, flattened. She'd never dared to dream this big. Once again, James didn't promise to save her. He simply opened a door and left it up to her to walk through. That afternoon, she found James in the backyard garden. He was sitting under the bougainvillea trellis, holding a book the fading sunlight could no longer fully illuminate. "Did you do this?" she asked, her voice still trembling. James looked up, his eyes gentle. "Only if you're ready." Emily clutched the letter tightly. "I've been afraid to study again, afraid I wouldn't keep up, afraid of being looked at with pity." James smiled faintly. "And now?" She took a deep breath. "Now, I'm afraid I'll regret it if I don't try," he nodded. "Then don't let fear take the wheel. You deserve to sit in the driver's seat of your own life, Emily." She looked at him, and for the first time she didn't feel like she owed anyone anything. That evening, a light rain began to fall. Emily was on the porch, holding a cup of tea, gazing into the night when James stepped out. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, one hand carrying a small navy blue box. "Can I say something?" "A little crazy," he began. Emily glanced at the box, her heart pounding like a drum. "We're not a fairy tale," he said, "and I don't want you to be a princess." "I've never been a princess," she said with a soft laugh. "I know. You're a warrior. The one who brought my son back to me, the one who made me believe loving again was worth the risk." He opened the box. Inside was a delicate, simple ring, its shine carrying a sincerity no diamond could match. "Emily Carter," he said slowly, "I don't promise to be perfect, but I promise to walk with you through all the imperfections. Please." His voice softened. "Let me be the one you don't have to prove yourself to." Emily looked at him. For a fleeting moment, every memory flashed through her mind like a slow-motion film. The nights sleeping on the sidewalk, the days with empty hands, the times she swallowed tears in the dark. And then she nodded faintly. I don't need more time. I know where I am." James slipped the ring onto her finger, as if the whole world had just grown quieter. A few weeks later, during a routine health checkup to prepare for her course, the doctor handed her a results sheet with a smile. "Congratulations, you're pregnant." Emily froze for a few seconds. Her heartbeat slowed, then burst open, not with fear, but with life growing inside her, a testament that she'd stepped out of her past and was truly living. That evening, she placed the ultrasound image in an envelope and set it on the dining table in front of James. "I have a gift," she said, her eyes sparkling. He opened it, and for the first time, that steadfast man shed tears. "I'm going to be a father again," his voice choked. Emily took his hand. "A new chance for all three of us." James pulled her into his arms. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the first moonlight after many dim nights emerged, casting its glow on two people, once broken but who had chosen to love again, to live again. That morning the sky was a rare, pristine blue. White clouds drifted slowly across it, as if they too wanted to witness something beautiful about to unfold. In the small garden behind the Whitmore villa, where Lucas once painted, built forts, and laughed for the first time in years after silence, tiny string lights had been hung up and vibrant bougainvillea bloomed along the white wooden fences. There was no lavish banquet hall, no prestigious guests, just the people who truly needed to be there. Emily stood in a small room facing the mirror. Her hair was simply braided, adorned with a wildflower. She wore a delicate cream lace dress, unfussy, unpretentious, but so perfect it took her breath away. The doors swung open. Lucas appeared in a tiny suit, his tie slightly crooked, his eyes sparkling brightly. He stepped forward, holding out a small hand. "Come with me, Mom." Emily froze. Mom. A word she'd never thought she'd hear from that little boy's mouth. A word she'd never dared claim for herself in her entire life. She gently squeezed his hand, smiling through tears. "Thank you, Lucas. Thank you for calling me that." He shrugged innocently. "Because you're my mom now." James stood beneath a floral arch, where the sunlight fell just enough to light up his eyes as he saw her step out. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Their eyes met, a gaze that held everything. The losses, the falls to rock bottom, and the hands that had pulled each other back, up. The wedding unfolded to the sound of soft music, the breeze rustling through the bougainvillea, and the teary eyes of old Martha, the housekeeper, who had watched Emily go from not belonging to the most loved person in this house. When it came time for the vows, James took her hand, his voice warm and steady, just as it had been the first time she heard it. "I thought I'd never love again, that life was just duty and endless meetings. But then you walked in, just to return a wallet, and you brought back everything I'd lost. My son's laughter, peace in my own home, and me." Emily smiled, tears rolling down her cheeks. She replied, her voice trembling with emotion, "I spent my whole life hiding in the shadows, thinking it was enough not to bother anyone. But you, Lucas, you showed me I could not only step into the light, but become light for someone else." James leaned down, gently kissing her forehead like a promise. "From now on, you'll never walk alone." That evening, Emily sat alone on the porch, the spot that had once been her only refuge when she was still a stranger in this villa. The night breeze brushed her dress, and Lucas's laughter echoed from somewhere inside. She opened a small drawer beside her, pulling out an old weathered box. Inside was the worn black leather wallet, the thing that had started it all. She held it in her hands, smiling. "Grandma, you once said, 'You're a light, even if no one sees it. Keep shining.' Today I believe that." James approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her. In his hand was a steaming cup of tea, a habit he'd picked up from her and never let go of. "Thinking about that day again?" he asked. Emily nodded. "This wallet. It was once a chance to change my life, but not because of the money inside. Because I didn't sell myself for it. James squeezed her hand gently. And because you chose what was right, even when no one was watching. She rested her head on his shoulder, her gaze drifting to the night sky, where stars twinkled like the small dreams that had pieced her heart back together. Inside, Lucas ran up and hugged their legs, grinning ear to ear. I think the baby's gonna like warm tea like Mom. Emily laughed, her hand resting lightly on her stomach. A new life, a new journey. But this time, she wasn't starting alone.